we call the Passion according to Luke. It's Luke's story of Jesus' death on the cross. And as is my Good Friday custom, I usually just read that myself, but comment and try to give you backstory, context, and a little insight along the way of the reading. So if you like short, quick sermons, I'm sorry. Easter, we'll take care of you on Easter, but today this might be a little longer, so we have one reading only on Good Friday, and it's our gospel according to Luke. But before we begin, I want to just give you a little context and set the table on what's happening in our gospel story. This is Friday morning where we pick up the story. Thursday night, Jesus is betrayed by Judas. He's arrested. He is brought before a quickly assembled emergency session of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is the ruling Jewish council of all matters that Rome has given the Jewish people to self-govern. And so there's 70 seats on the Sanhedrin, plus the high priest. There's 71 total. There are not 71 people at this emergency hearing because it's in the middle of the night, and you can maybe imagine they had an idea of who might be favorable to executing Jesus and who might be opposed to it. So maybe the people that got the phone calls in the middle of the night were the ones that were favorable, and the people that would have been opposed were probably left sleeping. And they move to the office of Pontius Pilate as soon as it opens in the morning. Now, the Roman workday would start a little after 6 a.m. It would end around 2 p.m. So the Romans wouldn't work 9 to 5, they would work 6 to 2. And the Jewish people, the leaders, the Sanhedrin, are trying to get Jesus to Pilate's office first thing in the morning because they want Pilate to pass the order to execute Jesus. Now, they could have killed Jesus just in the middle of the night, mob mentality or assassination style. That all could have happened, but they don't want that to happen. The people regard Jesus as a prophet. So they want Rome to kill Jesus. And the way that has to happen is Jesus has to be crucified, because everyone knows a crucifixion is only Roman in that time. It's not, you just can't get a mob together and crucify someone. That is, the Roman government does that. So they want any of the people who are angry about the death of Jesus to be angry at the Romans, not angry at the priests. And so what they're trying to spend the morning doing is convincing the Romans to kill Jesus for them. And that's where we pick up our story this morning. So the assembly rose as a body and brought Jesus before Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man perverting our nation, forbidding us to pay taxes to the emperor, and saying that he is the Messiah, a king." So these are the charges that they're bringing before Pilate. The one that, you could tell is just fabricated is about the taxes, but they figure that's the one that might get Pilate's interest. Pilate doesn't really care about the Jewish religion. He's not that interested in any of the religious disputes of who's the Messiah, who isn't. It's not his deal. But, every government cares about taxes. That is true now. It was true then. So they thought if they put that in there, that Jesus would be taken a little more seriously by them. So then Pilate asks Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered, "You say so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no basis for an accusation against this man." But they were insistent and said, "He stirs up the people by teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee where he began, even to this place." So Pilate is not actually that bad at his job. He recognizes right away kind of what's happening here, and he says, "I find no basis for death." There's not even a serious charge against this man. But the Pharisees were right. The Sanhedrin, the people that brought Jesus to Pilate, they say he stirs up people by teaching throughout all Judea. That's actually a true statement. Jesus does. He stirs up people. What they fail to mention is most of the time, Jesus' anger is directed at the religious leaders, not the political leaders. And they conveniently leave that part out. Jesus stirs up people against them, not against Rome. And in this time, they want him to direct his anger towards Rome. This is the Messiah they want so bad. Someone who's going to come and say, we're great, let's fight the Romans. And what Jesus is doing is actually much harder, and they don't like it as much. He's saying, I'm interested in the condition of your heart. I'm not interested in the Romans. I'm interested in you. What are you loving? What are you valuing? What are you thinking? And the Pharisees were challenged, so were the chief priests by this, and it's why their anger at Jesus was so great, because he was challenging the way they taught people to think about God. He wasn't really challenging the structure of the Roman Empire. Now, when Pilate heard this, he asked whether this man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him off to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. Herod is not the same Herod as the birth story of Jesus. It's a different Herod. It's his son. And Herod and Pilate aren't exactly friends, because Herod, the Herod that existed, Herod the dad, Herod Sr., that existed in the time of Jesus' birth, Rome trusted him and let him rule over the whole land of what we consider Israel for Caesar. So there was no Pontius Pilate, there was no Roman governor at the time of Jesus' birth. It was just King Herod. But when King Herod died, their level of confidence in his sons was not great. So they took away the important parts of the kingdom and gave it to a Roman administrator. They let Herod have Galilee. They let his brother Philip have another land. And they were not considered the glamour spots of the kingdom, but they still had a little something. And so Pilate says, wait, he's from Galilee? Maybe he could be tried in under Herod's jurisdiction. Lawyers might, recognize this. Like, where is a person tried? Like, is it federal? Is it state? Is it Texas? Is it somewhere else? Right? Same idea is going on here. Pilate doesn't want to deal with this. He feels like it's a religious squabble. Maybe Herod could handle it better, because Herod's kind of Jewish. He was born of a Jewish-Gentile mix marriage, so Herod has some knowledge of the Jewish religion, although he's not totally just Jewish, but he knows more than Pilate. So Pilate says, perfect, let's send him over to Herod. Now, everyone's in Jerusalem because it's Passover, so Jesus doesn't have to get transported very far. Herod's palace would just be down the street from Pilate's residence. So this is literally a 2-minute walk, and he sends Jesus to Herod. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had been wanting to see him for a long time, because he had heard about him and was hoping to see him perform some sign. He questioned him at some length, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. Even Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then he put an elegant robe on him and sent him back to Pilate. That same day, Herod and Pilate became friends with each other. Before this, they had been enemies. In our Gospel of Luke, Jesus does not speak to Herod and give him any answers. He speaks to Pilate more than anyone else, but he does not say a word to Herod. I tend to think Herod is the one that killed his cousin, John the Baptist, and so Herod gets nothing from Jesus. If you ever see images or have seen, movies or something, art with Jesus suffering and he's wearing like a purple robe with the crown of thorns, that comes from this scene. Herod, they kind of mock him. They give him like a royal robe to make fun of him. And so the purple was the royal color back in those days. Pilate then called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was perverting the people, and here I have examined him in your presence, and have not found this man guilty of any charges against him. neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. Indeed, he has done nothing to deserve death. I will therefore have him flogged and release him. A Roman flogging, a whipping. It's going to have him whipped. Pilate is trying to find a settlement, so to speak. Right? Pilate is, you want him dead. I think he's innocent. Let's meet in the middle. I'll have him beat up. And then we can all walk away. It's compromise. Pilate's looking for a settlement. A Roman flogging was pretty harsh. Don't think when you think of like a whip, like Indiana Jones, don't think of that type of whip. A Roman whip was very short. It was only about this long, and it had a handle and then 3 kind of pieces of leather that went out, and tied in knots in that leather were shards of metal and pieces of bone. And the person who was being whipped would be tied to a post in the middle, and there would be a person, a Roman soldier on each side with a whip. And they didn't stand far away. They were actually very close, because the point of a Roman flogging was not, again, what we think of with like a whip with like Indiana Jones or a lion tamer, where you're 20 feet away and you use the whip. The point of the Roman flogging was to pull at the skin and destroy the muscles. So they would be close and they would whip Jesus in the back, but the how they did it was then they would rake this piece of leather, these pieces of leather with bone and metal shards in it, across the back muscles. And the idea was it was meant to debilitate a person for weeks and months. If you've ever had any type of surgery where you had your ab muscles or your back muscles or your, those muscles on the side, the obliques, where they've been cut, you know how long it takes to recover from those, and just how your movements are affected by the loss of those muscles. The Roman flogging was meant to really debilitate someone's back muscles so that they had no strength, and it would take weeks and months to recover from the damage done from a Roman flogging. Pilate thought, this is surely enough, that we will have him flogged. It is a horrible punishment, and that you'll be satisfied. He'll know whatever he's doing wrong, he'll stop doing it because this hurts so much. You'll be happy, and I don't have to kill an innocent man. And Pilate thinks he's come to a win-win. But they all shouted together, "Away with this fellow! Release Barabbas for us." This was a man who had been put in prison for an insurrection that had taken place in the city and for murder. What the Gospel of Luke doesn't mention is that Pilate is granting a pardon for Passover. We talk about, pardons in our system. Pilate had the ability to grant pardons, and the custom that we hear from the Bible is that at the Feast of Passover, the highest Jewish holy day, Pilate would grant a pardon for someone to show mercy to the Jewish people. So they're trying to get ahead of Pilate and saying, give us Barabbas as our pardon. We don't want Jesus as our pardon. Give us Barabbas. And Barabbas is someone who's in jail. We would probably consider Barabbas today a type of terrorist. Barabbas was part of a group of Jewish people who were committed to just causing chaos whenever Romans were gathered together. Roman officials, important people, they would try to do assassinations. They would try to start riots whenever there were massive crowds around important Roman officials. Barabbas is in jail for that. It's interesting, the name Barabbas means son of the Father. That's what the name means. Kind of an interesting play on words as we think about Jesus being the son of the Father, yet the person that the Jewish people want is a very different type of person than Jesus. So Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again. But they kept shouting, "Crucify, crucify him." A third time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no ground for the sentence of death. I will therefore have him flogged and then release him." But they kept urgently demanding with loud shouts that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. Pilate does not want to kill Jesus. But more than Pilate not wanting to kill Jesus, Pilate doesn't want to riot. The city of Jerusalem around the time of Jesus had about 55 to 60,000 people. So kind of around the size of Harlingen. But during Passover, it's believed that it would grow to 180 to 200,000 people for the pilgrimage. So think about what would happen in this town if the population tripled for a week. Think about kind of where people would be gathering, how crowded things would be, how tensions would be, how tired and cranky people will start to get. And Pilate knows that this is the weekend. If there was going to be a riot to end all riots, it would be this weekend because of the amount of people in the city. So while Pilate sees Jesus as innocent, more importantly, Pilate wants to keep the peace. So he gives up Jesus to be crucified to avoid the riot. So Pilate gave his verdict that their demand should be granted. He released the man they asked for, the one who had been put in prison for insurrection and murder, and he handed Jesus over as they wished. So here's a little note about crucifixion if you're not aware. Crucifixion was a Roman style of execution reserved for the worst people. It was reserved for people who were treasonous. It was reserved for people who were murderers. It was not white-collar crime. It wasn't a white-collar crime punishment. Crucifixion was for violent and treasonous people. It was meant to be not only painful, but dehumanizing and humiliating and public. And so we're going to see parts of that throughout this whole, the next course of our reading about Roman crucifixion. The idea of the Romans was if we punish you as brutally, as violently, and as publicly as possible, the majority of people will never even think about breaking the law again. That was how the Romans approached rule. That's how they governed such a wide amount of territory. It's not because they had enough soldiers and enough police to keep order. It's because their style of punishment was so brutal and public that it kept mass amounts of people from rebelling against them. And so Pilate hands Jesus over to be crucified. And as they led him away, they seized a man. Notice that word, they seized a man, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming from the country. And they laid the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. I want you to hear those two words that Luke uses. They seized a man and they made him carry it behind Jesus. This is not a voluntary act of service by Simon. Those of you that watched The Chosen or did our Chosen study, we know there was an episode in season 4 where the Roman soldiers make the disciples carry their armor for a mile. That was something the Romans could do. The Romans could make any person carry something for them for up to 1 mile. Simon is being made to carry the cross of Jesus for a mile because Jesus has just been flogged and his back muscles are probably completely destroyed and he has no strength to carry it on his own. So they make Simon do it. He doesn't get a choice. Simon is a man coming in for pilgrimage from a place called Cyrene. Cyrene is a city in Libya today, what was a city in modern-day Libya, and it had a huge Jewish population. Up to 100,000 Jewish people lived in Cyrene at the time of Jesus. And so there'd be this large number of Cyrenians that would come to Jerusalem for the Passover pilgrimage, Simon being one of them. And they grab him. Why him? Who knows? They grab him and make him carry Jesus' cross for up to a mile. Where they're going to go is from Pilate's palace to outside the city. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, a great number of people followed him, and among them were women who were beating their breasts and wailing for him. But Jesus turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For the days are surely coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do this when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry? Jesus is being followed by a large amount of people. So remember, Roman crucifixion is meant to be painful, brutal, dehumanizing, and public. So what's happening is Jesus is carrying his cross, and then Simon carries the cross for Jesus. And they're walking through the main street of Jerusalem because the Roman people want everyone to come out of their house and see what's happening to another person that defied Roman law. And so crowds gather through these streets as they follow Jesus, where he's being led to be executed. And at some point, Jesus stops or along the way has an interaction with this group of women who are following him, crying, beating their breasts. And it's interesting how he addresses them. He calls them daughters of Jerusalem. That's an important part of the interaction. Daughters of Jerusalem. These are women of the city of Jerusalem. And he says, don't cry for me, cry for yourselves and for your children. He says, the days are coming when they will say, blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed. They will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do this when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry? That was a saying in the Jewish world at Jesus' time. If you do this when things are peaceful and good, what's going to happen when things get hard? What's going to happen when things get tough? So here, let me translate what Jesus is saying. He's saying, don't cry for me, cry for yourselves. Jerusalem has rejected its king. And so the days are coming when hard times are going to fall upon this city. If this is how they act towards God when things are peaceful, when God is here trying to show you his favor, working miracles among you, how are the people of Jerusalem going to respond when things are not peaceful, when times are hard? And so if you know anything about the story of Jerusalem in 70 AD, just a generation after this, Jerusalem is completely destroyed by the Romans. The temple's knocked down, the city's burned down, the Romans destroy the city. A lot of Christians that lived in that area remembered these types of sayings of Jesus. This isn't the only one where he talks about Jerusalem being destroyed. And when the Romans came, they left because they said, Jesus told us a hard time was coming. And it caused a huge rift between the Jewish and Christian communities because the Jewish people stayed to fight. They said, we're God's people. We can fight the Romans like we've always fought our enemies. And the Christians said, Jesus told us this was not going to end well. We're out of here. And the Jewish people thought the Christians were traitors to the holy city because these types of things that were written down, they remembered them. They talked about them. And so Jesus is telling them, don't cry for me. This city has rejected its Messiah. Cry for the city. When a people reject God, it's not God that suffers. It's the people. This is what Jesus is trying to tell them. This is a true thing throughout the scripture. When a people reject God, it's not God that suffers, it's the people. So 2 others also who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. So the place of the Skull could be called the Skull because a lot of people died there, but it really was a hill right by the entrance to the city. And it looked like a skull. It had 2 indents that looked like the eye sockets of a skull. So if you looked at the hill from a distance, it kind of resembled a skull. So they called it the Skull. And it was this high point by the entrance of Jerusalem where the Romans would do their executions. The Romans had a very different idea about what someone should see when they enter into a city. A modern-day chamber of commerce would not have made it in the Roman time. The Romans wanted you to see people who were executed for crimes because they wanted you to know when you enter this city, these behaviors won't be tolerated. They did not want to make a beautiful front door to a city. They wanted you to see, we take Roman law seriously in this city. So the Skull is this hill outside the city entrance where people would be executed on the cross. That's where they're taking Jesus. So he walked from Pilate's palace to the Skull, and that's where he's going to be crucified. 2 thieves are crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And they cast lots to divide his clothing, and the people stood by watching, but the leaders scoffed at him, saying, He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him, This is the King of the Jews. They would write on the cross the charge against the person, why they were being killed, because the Romans crucified people on the hill by the entrance of the city so everyone walking in could see. So that's what they put above Jesus' cross. This is the King of the Jews. In Luke's gospel, it's the only gospel where we get the story of Jesus saying, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. There's a great lesson in this story for us that Jesus teaches us. Forgiveness begins with a decision in the midst of our pain. I, many times in my life, have waited for forgiveness till I wasn't hurt anymore, when the emotions faded, when the anger left. But Jesus shows us a different way. He says forgiveness, while he's on the cross, forgiveness is a decision we make in the midst of our pain. And that decision helps to heal the emotions and the anger and the wounds. You notice Jesus doesn't wait. None of us would have blamed Jesus if on Easter Sunday he said, it all worked out. Let bygones be bygones. We all would have said, that's perfectly reasonable. That's what any of us may have done. But Jesus, with nails in his hands and feet, blood dripping from his body, says, Father, forgive them. In the midst of his pain, he makes a decision to forgive. And I would say that lesson for us is helpful when we're struggling with forgiveness, to remember forgiveness is a decision we make in the midst of our pain. We don't let the emotions lead to the decision to forgive. We make the decision to forgive, and that begins the healing of the emotions. Jesus practices what he preaches. Now, one of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. He replied, Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. The two thieves that were on the cross with Jesus are traditionally known as Dismas and Justus. Dismas is the good thief. I don't know how they got their names, but Dismas is the tradition holds that the name of the good thief is Dismas. It does not tell us what they stole, why they're on the cross, just that in this moment, he recognizes who Jesus is. And there's two beautiful parts to this. He recognizes who Jesus is in Jesus's worst moment. There are lots of times when people come and praise Jesus and give him thanks for the miracles he does, for the signs and the wonders and the healings. But this moment, Jesus is getting mocked, humiliated, made fun of. But this person still recognizes who Jesus is in his worst moment. But he also is recognizing who Jesus is in the thief's worst moment. He's dying too. Right? It's easy to say, well, Jesus is having a bad moment. Well, the person next to him on the cross is also dying. It's his worst moment too. And in those moments, he's still able to see Jesus. And I think there's something so beautiful to God about when we're able to see him in our worst moments. I was recently talking with someone who found out a family member had cancer, and it was a very serious, very late stage form of cancer. And before they knew kind of what the road would be or how, what the chances were, this is what they said. They said, I will praise him in this wherever it leads. And I just thought that was such a beautiful offering of faith to God in the midst of such pain that this family was going through, like the good thief. Whatever is going to happen in my worst moment, I'm deciding I will praise you. And so the thief on the cross makes this moment about recognizing Jesus and just not asking for him to save him, but just to say, would you remember me when you're in glory? And Jesus says, I'll do you one better. Today, you will be with me in paradise. You can be there with me. That's another story in this gospel that only is that Luke tells. Now it was about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. That curtain was a 60-foot curtain. When you think about like theater, when you go to a theater show and the curtain comes over the stage when they're changing things behind it, I mean, this is a huge curtain. This isn't just like a window curtain in your house. This is a 60-foot curtain. It's made of blue, scarlet, and purple linen. And it served in the temple to separate the holiest of holy places from where the people would worship. And as Jesus is dying, the curtain of the temple is ripped in half. The symbolism of that for the people who lived in that time is that the barrier that keeps us from getting too close to God because of our sinfulness is being broken in the death of Jesus. And that's how Luke says his mission is accomplished. This is what Jesus is here to do. He's here to take the sin of the world, take it to the cross, offer atonement so that we can have the relationship with God that we were prevented from having. So the temple being ripped in two is the sign of that. And then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. When the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said, certainly, this man was innocent. Now, tradition holds that the centurion also had a name, Longinus, and Longinus had an issue with his eyes. We don't know exactly what it was, but he was losing his sight, and that's why he couldn't do like combat duty anymore. He was on execution duty, which was a little less intensive. And tradition holds that when they pierced Jesus' side, the blood and water that poured out, some got on his face, and his eyes were healed, and that he became a Christian after that. Whether that's true or not, you can see his witness to who Jesus was. Again, the second person in this story. The first is the thief. The second is the soldier that recognizes Jesus even through his death. And when all the crowds had gathered there for this spectacle, saw what had taken place, they returned home beating their breasts. But all his acquaintances, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. Now there was a good and righteous man named Joseph, who, though a member of the council, had not agreed to their plan and action. This is Joseph of Arimathea, Yusef, if you watch The Chosen. And we talk a lot about, guilt by association. And it's just important to remember this person was a part of the body that executed Jesus, but he's recognized as a righteous man because his heart was different. His heart was different. God sees the heart. His heart was different. So he came from the Jewish town of Arimathea, and he was waiting expectantly for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down, wrapped it in a linen cloth, and laid it in a rock-hewn tomb where no one had ever been laid. It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. The women who had come with him from Galilee followed, and they saw the tomb and how the body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. This is because Jesus is being taken down from the cross and buried so late at night on Friday that they don't have time to prepare his body for burial like they feel he deserves. And so they're going to go home and prepare and come back first thing Sunday morning, as soon as the Sabbath is over, because Nothing is open on the Sabbath. They can't get the stone rolled away. They're not going to be able to get to the cemetery. So they're going to come back as soon as the Sabbath is done, sunrise, Sunday morning, and give Jesus the anointing that his body deserves to have a proper burial. That's where the story will pick up. Now, there's two things in this story that I just want to point out before we move to our music and our prayers that are unique to Luke's gospel, and they are both stories of mercy. Jesus from the cross still shows mercy. First, the Father forgives them. They know not what they do, forgiving the people who are executing him. And then forgiving the thief, or telling the thief, today you'll be with me in paradise. And I want to encourage you to just keep that theme of mercy in mind as you think about this story today. Jesus was able to forgive in the midst of his pain. So if there's something that may be a wound that's fresh, that's still causing you some pain, we can follow Jesus' example. Maybe decide to forgive like Jesus did on the cross. Even if our emotions and our feelings aren't quite there yet, we can decide to forgive, and then the emotions follow. So if there's something that might need our decision to forgive, we might follow Jesus' lead and do that. And then the other would be to look at the thief, Dismas, the good thief, and think about the mercy that Jesus shows from the cross to others. And maybe we need to hear that because we're not forgiving ourselves of something, that it really doesn't matter where we've been. If we turn to him, he is merciful. It really doesn't matter what we've done or how many times we failed. If we turn to him, he's merciful. And then we think about the thief in the last moment of his life, the last hours of his life, found the Messiah. And maybe there's someone in our life that we're longing to find God. We're praying for them every day that they would find the peace that comes from a relationship with God. And I would encourage you to not lose hope. The thief on the cross is the motivation for every prison ministry, every death row ministry that exists in this country and around the world, because it's a great example to us that even in our last moments, he is merciful. So I would encourage you to keep that message of mercy in mind for forgiving others if we're hurt, for forgiving ourselves if we're struggling with that, and for praying for those that we long to find God. In this story, Luke gives us hope. Even in hard moments, he's merciful. Even when we failed, he's merciful. Even for those who are taking forever to find him, he is merciful.